All right, good afternoon. This is class 3 of Music Biz and Law. The date is April 6th of 2020, and welcome. Um, the Chinese have a curse, at least Robert F. Kennedy said this in a speech, that the Chinese have a curse, may you live in interesting times. And this is certainly an interesting time that we live in, and as much as I enjoy our conversations together as we have class, this is going to have to suffice for now. But what I would urge you to do is that as we talk about things today, as I talk about stuff today, and bring up some issues and talk about some ideas that you might want to incorporate as you pursue your business ideas. That as you have questions, would you email me those questions? And what I plan to do is start the classes with questions that you have or comments that you have so that we might try to um, at least have a sense of discussion as we move on with this. So you send me your questions or comments. I'll share those at the beginning of class, and that way we can have at least some uh, conversation and discussion, even if it is a week apart. Right. I will try to post classes by 1 o'clock on Mondays, or live broadcast, live stream at 1 o'clock. I'm getting started late today. I had some other issues I had to take care of. Um, I seem to be busier now than I was before all the coronavirus stuff. But I started a few minutes late, about 20 minutes late today, and apologize for that. But I will, if I haven't posted the class by 1 p.m. on Mondays, I'll live stream it at 1 p.m. on Mondays so that you know when you can get it. Normally, this would be a 3-hour class in terms of uh, content, but the lack of conversation means that I still have my hour and a half of notes for teaching, but we're missing the conversation portion of it. So make sure that you're keeping up with what we're talking about, and that you're sending me some topics of conversation and um, just ideas as we move along, questions that you have. All right. Um, Under pages and then resources, I provided supporting links for some of the things that we talk about. Today, you'll find, if you go back and check that, actually a couple days ago, I posted another um, paper on prioritizing your to-do list, prioritizing your life. Worth taking a look at. We'll try to cover that. I'll try to get to it today at some point if we have time. Your research paper should be approximately 1,250 words long. As a matter of fact, make it a minimum of 1,250 words. That's going to be about 5 pages, double spaced, 12-point type. But you need at least 3 sources. Normally, I would tell you not to use the internet, but I think in this case, you're going to pretty much be stuck with the internet. Try to, if you use sources from the internet, make sure that you're using as much as possible primary sources, so that you're not using a source that somebody else has sourced from something else, because it's hard to then follow up and and uh, make sure that you're sourcing correctly. All right, I am going to one thing here. All right. Due dates. I'd like your topic on your research paper finalized by next week. That's going to be due the 12th. And what I've done here is, since class is on Monday, I've tried to make the due dates by midnight the day before class. So your due dates for the next set of class stuff is going to be Sunday night at midnight. And if you can keep up with that, keep things on track. Uh, I I am thinking of incorporating a 10% per day penalty if you're late on handing stuff in. I won't do that if you hand stuff in on time, but if we're having habitual late submission of papers, then I'm going to have to incorporate that and start using it because it makes it much more difficult for me to grade if I have to grade a set of papers and then wait for a week or 2 weeks and grade the last set of papers. I like to grade everything at the same time. And so it's important that you get stuff in on time. So if you're getting stuff in on time, I won't come down hard on you for being late. But if you're not getting stuff in on time, I'm going to have to incorporate a penalty. And if I do that, it'll be a 10% drop um, in your points for that project per day that it's late. So just don't be late. Just get stuff done. I would imagine you have a lot of free time now to do things that you couldn't do before. If that's an issue, let me know, and I'm more than happy to work with you. So topics finalized. That's due by 4/12. Make sure that I know what your topic is and that I've given you approval for that topic before you start your research. Um, 3 sources that you're going to use and an outline of what you plan to follow in terms of writing your paper. That should be, the outline should be your main thesis statement. It should be your opening paragraph. The outline should include your closing paragraph and then perhaps the main point of each paragraph in your paper. So make sure that you are, it's going to be a fully fleshed out outline. So that's 3 sources in your outline due 2 weeks from last night, midnight. Your rough draft is due on 4/26. That's 3 weeks from now, April 26th. Final draft and presentation is May 3rd. Presentation will May 3rd at midnight. The presentation we'll try to share on May 4th as part of the final class. Probably the best way to do that is to do a video, post it on Google Drive, and then share the Google Drive link with all of us so that we can watch those presentations. That way you can use internet sources and YouTube videos and not have to worry about YouTube kicking it off. So, but if you have another way you want to do it, that's fine too. Let's see, you'll also be submitting your business plan to the class, and that's also on 5/4, May 4th, due by then. And your goal is to sell everyone on your plan, get them interested in it. And both videos will be uploaded and not included in the regular Canvas YouTube video. So make sure that you're planning in that direction. All right, I've already said assignments are due by Sunday midnight, the Sunday after they're given. And we talked about you sending in questions, and I'll cover them in class. All right. This is for next week. In your text, all you need to know about the music business, read pages 211 through 342. It's on songwriting and music publishing. So it's 211 through pages 342. Quite a bit of reading, but it's pretty quick in this book. It reads pretty quick. In addition, we'll cover some, we'll talk about income statements and the kinds of things, making monthly projections, those kinds of things, as you continue to build your business plan. For this week, we're going to talk a little bit about record deals. That's page, you should have read page 69 through 210. If you haven't, this is a good time to stop the video, read 69 through 210 so that you're ready to incorporate some of the comments that I'll have about what you've read. And then I have another thing that I want to cover with you if we have the time. Writing your business plan, assignment 3. Now this is due the 12th of April. That is Sunday, next Sunday, midnight. And that is, I want you to describe the legal structure of your business. We've talked about this already in previous class. Who owns what? Um, State whether you have or intend to incorporate your business as a C or an S corporation, form a general or limited partnership, or you're a sole proprietor or limited liability company. And what I'm looking for is um, just an understanding from you that you know how you want to structure your business. If you're putting a band together, does the band share the ownership? Or do you have 80% of the ownership and they have split 20? Or do you own the band and they work for you? Um, and I want you to talk about exactly how you plan to structure all that. So, because somehow, if you are successful, and we have to assume that you will be, that if you go out and start playing gigs and you have your group of homies with you and you're hitting different churches and venues, and all of a sudden you're sitting on $15,000 or $20,000 worth of cash, how do you divvy that cash up? And how are you going to do the accounting? So all that is dependent on how you structure your business. As I say, we've talked about business structures. You can go back and check some of the notes and the resources that I posted on Canvas, but you go back and check your notes. But I want you to talk about, let me read it to you again. Describe the legal structure of your business. Who owns what? State whether you have or intend to incorporate your business, form a general partnership, or sole proprietorship, or whatever form of business you want to take there. All right. So we talked about topics. Let's see. Topics finalized by 412. Got that? Um, all right. Okay, to recap, you need two things to be successful in business. You need a product and you need interest in the product. People have to be interested in your product. So you have to have a product that's viable, a product that people will want to have or want to pay for. And if you put those things together and then figure out if you can put a proper product together and then figure out how to promote that product, then you have a business. Or in this case, you have a viable band or songwriting career. Okay. The biz plan is about defining the product you have to offer. Describe how you plan to produce and market it and how to sustain that activity over time. I know it's been a while since we talked about this stuff, but I thought it's worth repeating. Um, but I'm going to take this and I am going to jump to another part of this lecture, and I'm going to jump right to here. All right. Okay. Record deals. This is how the record industry works. Now, the whole premise of this major, a CCM, is to provide you with the tools you need to pursue songwriting and performing as a Christian artist in a Christian world with a Christian worldview, and sidestep the uh, current commercial um, big company kinds of contracts, deals, and just the secular world's view of how your music should be produced. And but it's a good idea to look at how the rest of the world operates, so that you know what you're getting into, and you may decide that if somebody offers you a record contract, a major label offers you a record contract, you may want to take them up on it. So I want to talk about record deals. So, and in the book again, it's pages 69 through 210. I want to start with the three major record companies. There are three companies in the U.S. And international, actually, international focus, that dominate professional contemporary music, actually contemporary and classical music and jazz and any other. If you walk into a store and buy a CD, or you get online and do a download, streaming download, these companies are probably involved in that. The three companies are Universal, Sony, and Warner, which used to be Time Life, but now it's Warner. So Universal, Sony, and Warner, and the each of these companies has subsidiaries that you probably heard of. So, for instance, Universal has Interscope, Republic, Capitol Records, and then in that, Universal's Capitol Records has a subsidiary called Capitol CMG, which is a Capitol Christian Music Group. And the labels they have under that group is Sparrow, Forefront Records, Motown Gospel, and Hillsong. And their artists, and these are all working for Universal now. The artists include Chris Tomlin, Toby Mac, Amy Grant, Michael W. Smith, CeCe Winans, Jeremy Camp, David Crowder, the Newsboys, Matt Redman, Terry Job, and that's and many, many more. So when you think of Universal and you think of Universal Studios making movies, and you think of Universal theme parks, it's the same company. They also have massive uh, um, record business that incorporates many of the artists that you know and love. Lots of secular artists, lots of Christian artists. So that's Universal. The second large company is Sony. Sony is a Japanese company. And Sony has Columbia, RCA, Epic, and those kinds of record companies. Columbia and RCA used to be competitors. They're now under the same parent umbrella, Sony. Sony BMG has is the Christian side of things. It has Provident, Integrity Music, Brentwood, and Benson. And Sony's artists, Christian artists, would be Casting Crowns, Michael W. Smith, Jars of Clay, those kinds of folks. Then there's Warner, which is again Time Life Warner, now just called Warner. Warner has Atlantic, Warner, Elektra, and a number of other labels. Um, they had Word publishing, Word, which is huge in and of itself, and they sold 80% of Word to Curb Records in 2016. So Curb Records out of Nashville, and all of these companies are international in scope, but all of these companies have major Christian and country um, offices in Nashville. So the kind of the epicenter for Christian music is Nashville, Tennessee. So back in 2016, Warner sold their holding of Word, 80% of it, to Curb Records. They still have 20% of it and do their marketing and distribution. So they still have an agreement, still have their uh, thumb in Word, but it's now owned by Curb Records, which is a whole nother company. So Curb is huge, has lots of artists again that you've heard of, um, but the countries that are the groups here that would be part of Word, part of Curb, and therefore part of Warner would be King and Country, Francesca uh, Battistelli, Meredith Andrews, Big Daddy Weave, and then all three of these companies have independent labels. So there is true independent labels in the world of music. Those are labels that somebody starts out of their garage or their spare bedroom. Um, and they run it as a separate label. But the big companies, when an independent label is successful, and if an independent label has a successful artist, the big companies will come in and try to buy those independent labels so they can bring those under the same umbrella and and run it. And they're looking for revenue. Now, we're talking about Christian artists, so we're talking about Chris Tomlin, Toby Mac, Amy Grant, um, Michael W. Smith, and then Crowder and Matt Redman and Meredith Andrews, Big Daddy Weave. Those folks all work for companies that are uh, that are secular companies. So their parent companies, Universal, Sony, and Warner, are not Christian companies. They don't run with a Christian um, mindset, though the subsidies, the subsidiaries of these companies that are Christian, like for instance Capital CMG, do run with Christian sensitivity. So but they're still in business to make money. So the guy that's overseeing Capital CMG still has to, may be a Christian, but he has to answer to a boss who's probably not a Christian, and still has to show um, that they're pulling their own weight in terms of making money, and that their artists are successful, and that um, the uh, goals are being met for the business. Ultimately, as an independent artist, uh, your goal is, as you already expressed in the previous class, in the social media and marketing, your goal is to have a business where you can honor God, run that business with a Christian worldview, um, uh, touch the world with a Christian truth, and do it without selling your soul. That's your goal. That's not the goal of a secular of any of the businesses in the secular music industry. The goal of those businesses, the goals, I mean, they have one goal, and that's to make money. They're in business to make money, and so Christian music is a moneymaker for them. It's not their biggest moneymaker, but it is a genre. In their eyes, it's a genre just like rap or jazz or whatever other uh, subgroup. They're going to make most of their money from rock and pop music. And but these secondary or subgenres are genres that are important to them because there's a lot of money to be made there too. So now, in addition to the three main labels, there are independent labels, and I've already talked about this. There are true independents, and the true independent labels are not connected to one of the major companies in any way. Bethel Music is an independent company. So Bethel Music does their own thing, though it shouldn't be a surprise if somebody comes in and tries to buy Bethel Music. So Bethel Music has landed some pretty heavy, some pretty big hitters in the Christian industry, like Leland, and they're uh, they the more successful an independent is, the more likely they are to receive an offer they can't refuse from one of the major three music publishers, music producers. In addition to that, there's major distributed independence, and independent um, record companies where some or all of the functionings of recording and distributing the music are done by one of the major labels. So you could have an independent label that has an artist, and Universal has an agreement with them to do all of their marketing and distribution, and they may even do the recording, oversee the recording process and the production process. So there we go. Ah, okay. I think I'm centered now. Okay, so those are the independents. Now, retailers, and most CDs and vinyl, because vinyl, of course, has made a comeback, but most CDs and vinyl are purchased through Amazon. And if they aren't purchased through Amazon, people are going to buy them from either Walmart or Target. Those are the three big distributors, mostly Amazon, but those are the three big distributors. And the but the majority of music's actually purchased through streaming sources, and the trend is continuing towards streaming. So the CD, though there's still a market for CDs and vinyl, the market is shrinking. It doesn't mean that you should ignore it. It just means that you should be aware that it's not your main source of distribution for your music. The RIAA, which is the Recording Industry Association of America website, has the following. This is the latest facts that they have. Digital revenues were 88% of the music industry in 2018, even higher than that in 2019, and will certainly be higher than that in 2020. But think about that: 88% of the revenues, 88% of the revenues in the music industry are coming from digital either streaming or downloads. Streaming was 3/4 of the music industry revenue. So 88% was digital, 75% was was streaming. So 13% is downloading. So 75%. 9/10 of social media users do music-related social media activity. 9/10, 9 out of 10. Americans spend more than 4 hours a day listening to music. The average paid music subscriptions in 2018. So Spotify and whatever your music subscription services of choice were over 50 million music subscriptions in 2018. That's how people listen to music now. That's not how I listen to music, but that's probably how you listen to music. So, actually, I do have a subscription to a music streaming service. So, I guess I do listen to music that way. Um, More than 1.2 trillion songs were streamed on demand in 2018. Breaking an artist into a major market. So if you're a brand new artist and you want to become known in the market, you're the next Lady Gaga, probably not the next Lady Gaga, but you're the next whatever. To break into a major market is cost upwards of $2 million. So it costs a lot of money to develop a brand around a person and their music, and that's the way the industry works. You can be quite successful as a Christian musician and not have a national, international, or national following. So it's quite possible that you have a regional or a local um, presence, and that may be what all you want and all you need to fulfill how you feel God's called you. But page 75 in the book, do you need a record label? We addressed some of this in the last class, social media and marketing. Do you need a record label? He comes up basically with the same point that was in the previous book that we had. He says this, and I quote: "A direct relationship with fans is the next generation of marketing." So Donald Passman says, "Hey, if you want to get fans, the way to do it is through social media." All right, we're going to keep going here. How does working with a label work? Okay, so if you decide if you're out playing at a coffee shop or coffee house, Christian coffee house, and somebody comes up and says, "Hey, my uncle works for the Capital Christian Music Group. He really needs to hear your music," and you say, "Well, here's a CD, or let me send you my remember your PR pack that you produced in the last class. Let me send him my PR pack, and it's got my bio and my mission statement and some recordings, and if he's interested, he should give me a call. Okay, so all of a sudden you get a call from Uncle Bob or whoever it is that works for Capital Christian Music Group, and they say, "Hey, we're interested in talking to you about becoming one of our artists, one of our new artists." That means that they're planning on spending a lot of money to make you well known internationally, certainly nationally. How does it work? Well, the first thing they're going to do is they're going to advance you some money, and they're going to advance you enough money to help you produce a proper record and or recording, and then have something that they can then market. So they're going to guide you through that, and they are going to work with you to help develop you as an act and help develop your music. And they're also going to help guide you as you produce a product that they're going to be interested in selling. They're going to be directly involved in everything you're doing. So they're going to advance you the money, and their plan is to recoup that money. That advance is really a loan against future royalties. So you're going to sign a contract with them. They're going to give you a percentage of everything that you make. You could say, I mean, I don't want to say that you're going to give them a percentage because it's really the other way around. They're going to control your life and your music, and they're going to give you a percentage of everything that they make from marketing and from producing and marketing your music and producing and marketing you as an individual, as an artist. Um, you already know this, I'm sure, but if 500,000 albums sold is gold, that would be a gold album. And if you sell 1 million albums, that's considered platinum. And the digital equivalent of that, since people don't buy physical albums and CDs like they used to, the digital equivalent is 10 single song downloads is counted as an album sale. So if you post your music if they post your music to Spotify and people start downloading the songs, every download is counted, and once you get to ten downloads, they count that as an album sale. So if you want to get to 500,000 albums, then you're going to do 5 million downloads. So the math is simple, I think. Should be for most of you. Now, streams are different. Downloads actually take some effort and cost some money. So to download a song onto your streaming device or on your playback device, MP3 player or your phone or whatever you're downloading to, that download generally costs money or some kind of service that you're subscribed to. So so you pay your 99 cents and you download your track, or you pay whatever to get that music. Streaming is different. 1,500 streams equals one album. So 10 downloads and 1,500 streams are considered the equivalent in terms of money and in terms of whether or not you've gone gold or platinum with your recording. Obviously, if somebody buys a CD, that's the same as buying an album, and that's considered one album. Your royalties. Now, what do you actually make? The company out there, we'll go back to Columbia Christian Music Group. They're out there and they're helping you put this all together and distributing and promoting your music. That's something you don't have to worry about. They take care of all of that. They do have you show up and play gigs, and they put you on tour, and they do all of those things, but they control everything. If you are a new artist or a minor artist, if you're new to the scene, or if you've been around for a while but you haven't really had a big breakthrough into the big time, your royalties are going to be 15 to 17%. That means that they're keeping 85% of every dollar that's earned, and you're keeping 15%. Moderate to heavy, if you're well known and you're in demand, you're going to be able to command a 17 to 20%. royalty, and if you're a superstar, if you're a Taylor Swift, you're looking at 20 plus, and perhaps you'll even be able to negotiate owning some of your masters and things like that. So the people at the very top, um, uh, in my generation would have been Michael Jackson, um, uh, but Taylor Swift um, would have to be a mega star. Somebody, Lady Gaga would have been there at one point, um, but you get my meaning there. You understand what's going on. But 20%, 20% plus is what they're getting. All right. Matter of fact, let's talk about Taylor Swift. Taylor Swift, if you've been reading in the news, Taylor Swift lost the rights to her first 6 albums. That is, she does not own the rights at all to her music. Somebody else owns those rights. And what happened was when she was a teen and she started working, she signed the contracts. And the just so that you understand how the big labels work, they own the music. She writes the songs, but they own the music. And the music, as it's laid down in the master tapes, in the original recordings, those all belong to the company that she was working with, that was giving her at the beginning 15% royalties. They in turn can take that catalog of music and it becomes an asset to them, and they can sell that to whoever they want to. Now, what's interesting here is that that's her first 6 albums. She can't reference those albums. Um, she can't, if she wants to do a concert and she's playing those albums and lip syncing with them, she can't. If she wants to sell the right to a song to be in a movie, she can't. She does not own her own music. Now, this is typical in the music industry. So uh, I think they're worth her 6 album master recordings are worth 300 million right now. I think that's what they were purchased for. Um, Taylor Swift is trying to get around that by re-recording the songs that are on those 6 albums. And so once she does that, she'll be able to, if somebody wants to place one of her songs in a commercial or in a movie, they can contact her and use her master recording as opposed to the original master recording. But understand that what we get used to is the original master recording. So if you listen to a song by the Beatles, you're listening to a master recording that was produced back in the mid 60s. That hasn't changed. Somebody owns that. And matter of fact, Michael Jackson, I think, owned that at one point. But uh, the those master recordings that become iconic with your name once you become famous are owned, usually not owned by the artists that's singing them. So just something to be aware of. Um, then there's 360 rights. 360 rights, it's like a complete circle. 360 rights. Um, the record business started to decline in 2000, and it started to decline with the rise of digital transmission. So at the same time that you could transmit uh, uh, email or videos, you could also obviously transmit music digitally. And the revenues for the recording industry has been dropping off sharply since 2000. And so they decided that to make up for lost income, they're going to they started to demand 300 what's called 360 rights. 360 rights includes a percentage of the money you make from touring, from songwriting, from merchandising, fan clubs, sponsorship money if you're getting paid to sponsor something, film appearances, acting, commercials, modeling, anything that you can make money from as an artist from your likeness or your music is part of the 360 rights deals that record companies now demand, which means that Taylor Swift, we'll talk about Taylor Swift. She was in Cats, the latest uh, Cats flick. and she would have shared the revenues that she would have been paid to be in that movie. She would have shared the revenues that she would have made from being in that movie with her record company. They own part of her. So, um, and again, we look at the breakdown. They're keeping 80. She's taking 20%. Um, now, pages 84 through 210 of the book, um, great reading. Okay, goes through the particular numbers concerning contracts, music ownership, royalties, and a host of other stuff should you decide to go with a major label. It's worth a read so you understand the financial side of working for someone else. I'm not going to go into depth in that because the whole scope of this major is for you to do this on an independent kind of shoestring basis. And if you get to that point, um, things change. So, but it's definitely worth reading so you understand how the industry works. Um, and um, if you decide to go this route, if something happens and you decide to go this route, you have the opportunity. Be sure to reread these chapters. Two things: reread the chapters in the book, and hire an attorney before you sign a contract. Before you start talking to a record a company or record producer, before you do any of that, reread the chapters on the record industry and hire an attorney. Now, I'm not telling you not to do that. I'm just telling you that you need to have somebody representing you and that knows the way the business works before you wade into that so that you don't sign away your first 6 record albums and you can't access them at some point when you become rich and famous. Understand that when you first start out, you're not rich and famous, and if they say, we'll give you $1 if you just show up and play at the local Chick-fil-A, you're probably more than happy to do that. But if they're interested in you and they want to talk to you, it's time to hire an attorney, somebody that's going to protect your rights. Get a good one that comes out of this industry. All right, so should you sign with a label, a major or independent label, or should you go it alone? I'm going to try to be as unbiased about this as I can, because you may end up, one of you or two of you or all of you may end up at a point where somebody wants to sign you to a record contract. Should you do it? It depends. Okay. It depends on what you want to do with your music and what you want to do with your life. 15% of a lot of money is a lot of money. And a company that's going to take a shot, like I say, it's $2 million to turn you into a major star. And any company that's willing to spend $2 million on you sees great potential. Otherwise, they wouldn't be doing it. So the first thing is that 15% of a lot of money is a lot more than 100% of no money. And so if you maintain the rights to do your own music when you want to and perform where you want to, and you control the whole process, you may never get famous, but you will control your music. But you might get to keep 100% of $5,000 or $10,000 for a year worth of work. But of course, you have to pay for everything out of that too. On the other hand, 15%, if you're pulling in, if you as an individual are pulling in $40 million a year, 15 or 20% of $40 million a year, let's say 20% of 40 million would be $8 million. That's not bad money. And so, and certainly Taylor Swift makes a lot more than that. So, you might decide to go that route simply because of the money. Understand that you give up controlling your image, your music, and your life. They control it. But that's not that different than working for any other business. So if you decide to go with a record company, you're simply becoming an employee in a certain sense. You become an employee of that record company, as opposed to running your own business, your own company. Um, I'll give you something maybe to compare it to. When I was a stockbroker, um, the business paid this way. When I started out, I was given an advance, basically a loan. And when I started out, I had no clients and I had no income. In the brokerage industry, the money you make is directly tied to the business that you do with your clients. So if I didn't have any clients, I didn't have any business. If I didn't have any business, I had no income. So when you start out in the industry, they give you something called an advance, exactly the same thing that we're talking about here that a record company would do for you. And what happens is that in this case, I'll give you the actual dollars. Um, they paid me an advance of $1,500 a month. I was brand new married, had a baby. My oldest daughter, Rebecca, had just been born when I was born a month after I started at Merrill Lynch. They were paying me $1,500 a month in the form of a loan that would be forgivable once I reached a certain level of business. I had to do enough business ultimately to cover the advance, and if I didn't cover that advance, I would have to pay Merrill Lynch back for that money. But once my advance was met, they split my earnings with me. For every dollar I earned, they kept 70% of it, and I kept 30% of it. So if I were making $100,000 a year, producing $100,000 a year in business for Merrill Lynch, they would pay me 30,000 of that. Now, the longer I worked for them, and the more business I did, um, that percentage went up. And so eventually, I became in the industry. They called them big hitters, and so my partner and I became big hitters, which it means nothing except that that's what they were called, what we were called. And at that point, our income jumped to 40% of earned income. So if we were producing $1 million in business at that point as a team, we were keeping 400,000 of it. So, and then in addition to that, once you get into those kinds of circles, they start adding perks to it. So there were benefits that were tied to that. There were bonuses and distributions that were also tied to that, and there was also a very generous stock program where if I bought Merrill Lynch stock, I bought it at a discount and immediately made 15% on it for any shares I wanted to buy. So it was a lucrative business. So we were successful in that industry, and we we started out with advances, but quickly moved to that point where we were successful and we were making a lot of money. Now, I could have gone to an independent. As a matter of fact, there were a couple independents that were they were called headhunters, probably called the same thing in the music industry. I haven't seen that yet, but headhunter is a person that would try to find successful brokers working for companies and try to get them to move to other companies. Um, at the time when I was a broker, the signing bonuses, if I had gone from Merrill Lynch to, um, uh, let's say, Kidder Peabody, at the time I was a broker, and things have changed, so it's not the same now. But at that point, they were paying anywhere from $1 million to $1.5 million up front as an advance to have brokers switch houses. So I had a friend, actually a guy that worked for me, that got $1 million advance to go to a competitor in town. And the way that worked was he went to the competitor, they wrote him a check for $1 million, and then they made him pay that back over time. So what they did was they said, we're going to give you this $1 million, but you have to pay us back with business that you're going to do over the next 5 years in this case. And that's the way it works. So that's big chunks of money that were flowing around. Um, but independent companies at the time were offering 90% payouts. So instead of a 30% payout moving to a 40% payout, there were companies that were offering 90% payouts. And those were the independent companies. And they were saying, if you come work for us, we'll pay you 90%, up to 95% of what you earn, and you get to keep all that. But the difference is that I would have had to pay for everything. I would have had to pay for my health insurance, my errors and omissions insurance, all my licensing, my office space, my my Bloomberg station, which is how I got all the quotes in for stocks and things like that. And so all that money that Merrill Lynch was absorbing, all those costs, all I had to do when I worked for Merrill Lynch was wake up in the morning, put on a suit, run into the office, stay on the phone all day. At 3:30, hung up the phone, went home, and spent time with my family. Had I gone the independent route, everything I would have been doing would have been business oriented because I would have had to take care of all the business side of all the business details, in addition to just generating business for the company. So 40% made me a lot more money working for Merrill Lynch, probably, than I would have made if I'd gone to be an independent and had to pay for all those things out of pocket. So um, the if I had to do it over, I would not have gone. I still wouldn't go. I don't know. Maybe I would go to an independent. I mean, if there were people I like to work with, and we wanted to be an independent business, I might do that actually. But if I were just starting out, there's no way I would want to do an independent deal. So, what can you do? Um, if somebody comes to you and offers you a record contract, read the book, get an attorney, go in with your eyes open, and consider it. If you're just starting out, that might be the best way to do it. Um, it it does happen, and if you go out and start to do some independent stuff, and you are singing in churches, somebody may hear you. I'm not telling you to go that route, and I'm not telling you not to go that route. There are advantages and disadvantages to it. One of the issues that I had with Merrill Lynch when I decided to retire was that my business wasn't my business. My business was their business. If I went with an independent, when it came time to retire, I could have put a price tag on my office and all my clients, and I could have just sold my business to another brokerage company. And at the time, um, it would have been probably worth, if I had been able to sell my business, and I couldn't because I was with Merrill Lynch, but at modest um, valuations. If what I was doing with Merrill Lynch could have been a business that was sellable to some other brokerage company, it would have easily been worth $10 million, somewhere between 10 and $15 million. That it wasn't worth that to me because I couldn't sell it. There wasn't any way to sell it. So I got my compensation with income for the years that I worked with them. But so I gave that up, um, thinking that the business wouldn't have been as big as it was with Merrill Lynch. Um, had I gone independent, my business may have only been worth $1 million or $1.5 million when I went to sell it. It was just better to work for Merrill Lynch. So, and I don't want you to think that I'm like incredibly wealthy. I'm not, because I worked for Merrill Lynch for 15 years. Then I retired um, in uh, in 2000, and basically lived off my earnings from 2000 until about 2010. So I worked for Merrill Lynch for 15 years and then had basically no income for the next 10 years. So there's not a whole lot there's not a whole lot there. So I'm just telling you the way it works, and I'm trying to be as transparent as possible. Please don't share these numbers with anybody else. They got to take the class to get them. But that is how independent independent stuff works. Whether you're in the brokerage business or you're in the music, the record business. I know these numbers right now where you are, the numbers just seem astronomically high. They aren't. Once you get into these businesses and you're successful, the amount of money that changes hands is is um, just startling. It's easy for me to look back now and see it, um, but at the time when I was your age and I was getting into being a broker, um, I thought wow, if I could make 30 or 40,000 a year, I'd be super wealthy. And you can get wealthy off of 30 or 40,000 a year. So, but but money is as a dear old man once shared with me, he's now deceased. But he said, money is a sticky thing. Don't let it stick to you. And I would say the same thing. Don't make your decisions based on money. Make your decisions based on how you want to live your life. Money definitely uh, is money is the root of all sorts of evil. And money doesn't buy happiness; it simply buys choices. Wealthy people are not happier than poor people. Um, uh, Matter of fact, very wealthy people are probably just as sad as very poor people. You don't want to be sad. You don't want to be poor, and you don't want to be wealthy. You just want to have what you need to live on. I'm quoting, obviously paraphrasing Paul, but um, money should not be your goal. But money is the way that an industry says to you, we like you, we value you. It's how you keep score. And so don't let the money make your decision for you. Make what you want to do, how you see God leading you, and what you want to do with your money, or what you want to do with your life and your music, override what you want to do with your money. Um, I left the brokerage industry um, just at the beginning of a very lucrative career because it was clear to me that having more money was wasn't even in the top 10 things I wanted to do with my life. It just wasn't important to me. But there were things that I did want to do, music and serve God, and it was becoming increasingly difficult for me to do that while focusing on my business at Merrill Lynch. Um, I also wanted to spend more time with my family. I mean, I already spent some time with my family, but really it was how I wanted to live my life. Um, and I figured if I ever needed money, I could always go out and make more. It's not that hard to make money. You may think it is now, it isn't. Um, but it's very easy to get caught up in a trap, in a cycle of trying to make money and then make more of it. So I would caution you against that. Make music, do your business, or do your if it's not music, if it's carving shells, or if it's doing a consulting for technology. Do it. Do what you how you've been gifted and how God has opened doors for you in those areas. And don't worry about the money. The money will take care of itself. I know you've heard that from other people. Do what you love and the money will follow. And the truth is that is exactly how it works. So I'm telling you, do what you love and the money will follow. All right, we're going to take a break there. Well, maybe we'll have some questions today. Let's see. I'll be back after I get my voice back, after it gets dry and raspy as I talk. So be right back. Give me like 10 minutes. Okay, we're back. Um, I want to talk about personal choices. So, um, when I'm talking about personal choices, I'm talking about not who you're going to marry or buying a house or what career should you follow. I'm talking about day-to-day personal choices, the things that you do to carry out what it is that you feel God has called you to do. And there's a number of different ways to organize how you spend your day. And I may share other ways of doing this in the future, but for right now, what I want to do is give you a matrix in which to, or at least an idea in terms of how to think about things that you have to do during the day. Um, I'm sure you've heard me say that um, life is rarely a choice between good and evil. Most of our choices are not good versus evil choices. They're not. They're not. You're not. Uh, Not that this doesn't happen, but normally we're not wrestling with the angel on one shoulder and the devil on the other shoulder, and we're desperately trying to uh, analyze every moment and figure out how do I follow the angel instead of the devil on my shoulder. Most decisions are decisions between good stuff and the best stuff, and it's the good stuff that prevents us from doing the best stuff. If I choose to do a good thing, but it's not the best thing that I could have done with my time, I've actually robbed myself of doing that best thing. So, um, the enemy of the best is good, or another way to say it, good is the enemy of best. And we spend perhaps too much time choosing to do things that are kind of good, or sort of good, or a little good, or okay, or certainly permissible. And in doing that, we completely miss the opportunity to do the very best thing we could have been doing at that time. So I've talked about that in other classes, and I know you'll hear me say that again. Um, but the good is the enemy of the best. We want to strive for the best things. But I want to talk about practical day to day. How do you make, when you're putting your list of things to do for the day, how do you know which ones to do? And as I talk about this is about prioritizing choices during the day. And as I talk about this, it's going to seem obvious to you, and yet perhaps this will perhaps this will give you a framework to be more intentional about what you're doing at any given moment. When you start to say, "Wait a second, this is falling into the wrong quadrant." We're going to talk about four quadrants. Um, so um, we all want to make a difference in this life. We all want to stand before God, and we all want to hear, "Well done, good and faithful servant." We want to maximize our output. We want to get everything done on our to-do lists, but we want to avoid the stress of missed deadlines, but still have time to spend with social things, with our friends and with our family, and to not miss out on the very best things that God has for us. So I want to keep my life simpler, less frenetic. Um, I don't expect life to become uh, completely chaos free uh, on this side of heaven, though perhaps I'll have to retire before things actually slow down. I don't mind being busy. I do mind not getting things done. And so I I want to start by talking about Charles Hummel. So Charles Hummel died in 2004. Um, he had a number of years, he accumulated a number of years of wonderfully productive Christian ministry. He was the director of faculty ministries for InterVarsity Christian Fellowship. He was the president of Barrington College in Rhode Island. He was the author of 15 books and Bible studies, but he's best known for a little booklet he wrote called Tyranny of the Urgent. Um, this booklet went on to gain fame not only in Christian circles, but in the secular world too. And it's worth examining. And now, what's interesting is tyranny of the urgent is a term that I first was exposed to when I was a broker at Merrill Lynch by a secular source. So the source of this booklet is Charles Hummel, who's a solid evangelical Christian that we would have enjoyed fellowship with if he were still alive, if he were in our midst right now. Um, but the booklet or the ideas in the booklet came to me through a secular source. So that is the kind of profound, though simple look at life that Charles Hummel has in this book, Tyranny of the Urgent. You can still get the booklet. You can buy it from Amazon or other booksellers. I would go to Amazon, and it's cheap. It's a very short book. It's a cheap book, and maybe it's something that you want to own. I think he originally wrote it in the mid 60s, maybe 66 or 60s, 1967. But he has some great ideas, and then those ideas were picked up by Stephen Covey in Seven Habits of Highly Successful People. So it's, which are both great books, by the way. Seven Habits is a wonderful book too. But um, it's, and again, when I share it with you, you may think, well, this is like too simple. But simple is good. It's one of the best things. It's simple. And I like how simple it is because it's easy to remember and it's easy to apply. And if it's easy to remember and easy to apply, you're much more likely to use it. So, in this book, Hummel argues that there's a regular tension between things that are urgent and things that are important. And he says far too often the urgent wins. Okay, so far too often it's that person who's saying, but you need to help me right now, or we need to do this right now. Um, and the urgent seems to shout louder to us than the important things of life. What are the urgent things of life? Urgent looks different for everyone. Even for the same individual, even for me, urgent can be different in different seasons and different settings. My urgent at Calvary, when I'm actually in my office and I'm working with students, my urgent in Calvary is different than my urgent at home. My urgent in dealing with students or my kids or my bosses or people at church is different than my urgent with my wife. So urgent looks different, and but I'm going to give you some ideas on urgent. Urgent stuff might be replying to email. So maybe email um, has become a god or an idol in your life, and you feel that you have to reply to it as soon as you get it. Writing a paper. Writing a paper can be an important thing, but all too often it becomes urgent when we don't give it the time it deserves and we wait until the last minute. That's one of the reasons why I have you writing the outline. The outline's due, the topic is due, and then the outline and the sources are due, and then a rough draft is due before the paper's due. Because what I'm making you do is deal with the paper on an ongoing basis so you don't have to think about it, write it, buff it up, and do a final draft all 2 hours before it's due. Okay? I want you to spend more time with it than that, and I want it to be meaningful and something that you get some value out of. And that happens if you stretch the process over time and you're deliberate and intentional in terms of the focus and attention that you're giving to it. Okay, so paying bills by their due date might be an urgent thing. Cleaning up your room before your roommate comes back, that could be an urgent thing. Now, none of those things are evil. They're all they need to be done at some point, um, but they can be done quickly or they can be done at a designated time. If you don't make a designated time for those things, they will ultimately become urgent. Then there are the important things in life. The important things in life are spending time with significant others, or dear friends, or spending time with God. Important things. Studying for an upcoming test. That's important. Writing a song, booking a gig, going to work, sharing the gospel with a friend at work, taking care of your health. Those are all important things. And uh, if we um, really quantify, I guess, in terms of importance, the things in our life, the things that are, if I was lying on my deathbed, what things would I regret not having completed? It's not the urgent things; it's the important things. I wouldn't be thinking about the paper that I handed in late. I'd be thinking about um, why didn't I call my mom to tell her I love her more often. Those are the things that I'll think about. I really need to call my mom and tell her I love her. I haven't done that for about 5 days. Um, so the important things. Now, where the important and the urgent intersect is what I want to talk about as we continue here. There are times when the urgent and the important are the same thing. And it's good to focus on those urgent, important things when those times come up. It's usually not the case, but sometimes, for instance, my son in law a couple days ago was cutting a bagel. And as he's cutting the bagel, the knife slipped through his thumb, cut down to the bone. And my daughter called me and said, hey, or called my wife and I and said, hey, Sean just cut his thumb down to the bone. What should we do? And it was it was clearly it required a trip to the hospital. So it was important because he would have just kept bleeding if we hadn't sent him to the hospital, and it was urgent for obvious reasons. He was spurting blood all over their kitchen, and sure enough, he went to the hospital and went to the emergency room. They had to stitch up his thumb. So but those kinds of things are not that common. Normally, things that are urgent are not nearly as important, and things that are important are not nearly as urgent. And so I want to talk again about when urgent and important collide, and it's worth repeating. Um, what is important? I'll say it this way. Got it written down. What is important is seldom urgent, and what is urgent is seldom important. Now that's from Eisenhower, the Dwight D. Eisenhower, former president, former general, Second World War, and president, and Dwight Eisenhower. That's a name you should know. Okay, so he said, "What is important is seldom urgent, and what is urgent is seldom important." And he came up with something called an Eisenhower chart, and we're going to take a look at this. And this is about it's about prioritizing uh, important over urgent. Okay, so let me see if there's anything else I want to share with you on this. All right. So this is especially important, if not urgent, but especially important as you start to think about running your business and promoting your career and writing your songs and or producing your shelves or developing your uh, technology clients, depending on what your business is. So the urgent, the less important, is prioritized through this, and and what happens normally is that we put the important on the back burner, And what we want to do is move the important to the front burner and move the urgent to where it belongs. Okay, so we're going to take a look at this chart. And this is priority matrix. Let's see if I can get that up there. There we go. Okay, so I think you can see that there. All right, the chart this is a simple tool, and it's used to sort and prioritize your professional and personal priorities that you juggle around, through the day. The x-axis captures the element of urgency, and you can see where that is here. Okay, so this is urgency, and the y-axis is importance, and it develops 4 quadrants where they intersect. We have 4 quadrants, and you might be able to see, probably can't. Okay, so this is of low urgency to high urgency, and this is low importance to high importance. Ooh, that's hard to do when because it's backwards from what I'm seeing, for mirroring it, I guess. Okay, so as we look at this, quadrant 1 is the most important and the most urgent. That's my son-in-law slicing open his thumb. Important to get it fixed and urgent to get it fixed. Okay, so that's one is obvious. If you have an important and urgent thing that you have to take care of, you shouldn't need a chart to know that you put that at the top of the list. Okay, so we don't need to talk about one. Really, what we want to talk about, as a matter of fact, we don't really have to talk about 4 either. Okay, quadrant 4 down here is the least urgent and the least important. Okay, least urgent, least important. So maybe picking up the mail today is in quadrant 4. It's not very important because there's a bunch of bills, and it's not very urgent because if I don't pick it up today, I can pick it up tomorrow. So down here in quadrant 4, that would be least urgent, least important. The ones we really struggle with are in quadrant 2 and quadrant 3. Okay? And that's what we want to talk about. So not every priority is urgent and important. Let's see. So 1 and 4, we talked about that. 1 and 4 are pretty easy. The complexity comes in quadrants 2 and 3. And this is where tyranny of the urgent comes in. So as we look at quadrant 2 is high importance and low urgency. Okay. Quadrant 3 is high urgency and low importance. So I'm going to put those in. Okay. So high importance, low urgency, and down here is high urgency, low importance. Now, here's what happens. We tend to do those tasks that are easiest. The tasks that are easiest tend not to be the most important tasks. They're going to fall in quadrants 2, probably quadrants 3 or 4. Okay, the easiest tasks are usually the least important, and that would be picking up the mail, maybe mowing the lawn, depending on how high the grass is. Um, and I mean, you have to come up with what's not that important. But what we tend to do is that urgency has a tendency to scream at us where importance doesn't. So it's important that you get that paper written, but you keep putting it off because there's other things that seem to be more urgent, or I mean, you would call it procrastinating. But the um, what I want you to start doing is remember this phrase, tyranny of the urgent, and realize that urgency doesn't make something important. Importance makes something important. And so how should we approach this chart? What we want to do is in any given day, let's say that you have 20 or 25 things. Let's say 20 things that you need to get done. One or two of those things might be urgent and important. You want to do those things first. As a matter of fact, you might not have anything in quadrant one in a typical day. Most of your stuff may be 2, 3, and 4. I would tell you ignore 4 until it becomes important. There are some things that are unimportant that become important at a certain point. So, for instance, um, uh, today we actually had a young guy who mows our lawn came over and mowed our lawn. Um, now the lawn doesn't have to be mowed again today or tomorrow or the next day, probably not for another week. And so mowing the lawn is now that it's been done is neither urgent nor is it important. But as we go through the next couple weeks, the important aspect of mowing the lawn will become greater and greater as the lawn gets higher and higher. So once it gets to a point where my wife can't stand it anymore, it will be high on the important list to have it mowed. Um, so things may start out down here or down here. Things may start down here on a level 4, not urgent, not important, and slowly move up to the important. Maybe I'll get a bill, a cell phone bill, on the 20th, but I don't have to pay it until the 10th of the next month. So when I get it on the 20th, it's not important and it's not urgent. And as I continue to move towards the 10th of the next month, it becomes both more urgent and more important until finally the day before it's due, it's urgent and important that I get it paid. Otherwise, they'll sever my phone service. Okay. Now, what do you do first? Quadrant 2 or quadrant 3? So do we do the important, high important, low urgent, or the high urgent, low important things? Normally we do the urgent things. We do the urgent things because by completing an urgent task, you take the pressure of that task or the screaming of that task in your ear saying, you need to do me, you need to complete me. That screaming from the urgency tends to override the much more soft whisper in our ear that this is important and it really needs to be done. That's why it's important to have marketing plans and to have a marketing process, so that if you know you're going to make 5 calls a day to set up gigs, that you're actually making those 5 calls a day and not letting some urgent thing, because it's very easy to say, well, George just called me and he needs help moving his sofa. So I'm going to drop what I'm doing and help him move his sofa. And now you didn't make the 5 calls to set up your gigs. Well, that's choosing an urgent thing over an important thing. You could have said to George, I'm sorry, I have some things that I have to do first, and when I'm done with that, I can come over and help you move the sofa. Maybe tomorrow I can help you move the sofa. And so you don't want to let the urgent things supplant the important things. So as you're looking at this chart, most things are going to be 2s and 3s and 4s. Ignore the 4s unless you get everything else done. Concentrate on the 2s and let the 3s, if you don't answer your email, that's urgent. If you don't answer your email in the next 3 hours, the world's not going to stop. And so start to identify things that are urgent but not important. Start and identify things that are important and not urgent. And choose the important, not urgent things over the urgent, not important things. So the order that you want to perform tasks in is quadrant 1, then quadrant 2 tasks, quadrant 3 tasks, and then quadrant 4 tasks. So that's it in a nutshell. If you are doing a list of things to do this week or today, what you want to do is as you list the things, don't just list things. List things, maybe you make up a little sheet and say, okay, here are my quadrant 1 things that have to be done today. And then you come over here and go, here are my quadrant 2 things that have to be done today. And here are my quadrant 3 things that I'll do today if I have time. And here are my quadrant 4 things that I'll do if I have time. So let's see. I'll leave this with you too. If you force yourself to stay in quadrant 2, if you do quadrant 1 things and you get those done, and then you force yourself to stick with quadrant 2, even if it's not, even if you do have to dip in and do some urgent things because you really need to get them done, but you probably don't. But if you do, then at the very least, always make sure that you're spending some time on quadrant 2 things so that the important things are getting done. Here's some tyranny of the urgent quotes. This is from Charles Hummel. He says, your greatest danger in letting the urgent things, your greatest danger is letting the urgent things crowd out the important things. Then he says, there's an insidious tendency to neglect important tasks that do not have to be done today or even this week. Listen to that. There is an insidious tendency to neglect important tasks that do not have to be done today or even this week. As a matter of most of the stuff on your marketing plan is very important, but it's not urgent. And the thing that will be the downfall of your marketing plan is when you don't spend time doing the important things because you spent your time doing stuff that doesn't matter. So, do the important things. He also says, but the root of all sin is self-sufficiency. He said, independence from the rule of God. So this is Charles Hummel again. The root of all sin is self-sufficiency. Not quite what the Bible says, but I agree with this statement. Independence from the rule of God. When we fail to wait prayerfully for God's guidance and strength, we are saying with our actions, if not with our words, that we do not need Him. How much of our service is actually going it alone? Finally, Hummel says, I've come to realize that I am the indispensable person only until the moment I say no. And what he's saying there is that people will try to impose a sense of urgency on you to do something that isn't on your, that hasn't even been placed on your chart for the day. So you've got your stuff ready to go, and then somebody comes up and tells you that this is really important and you have to do it, and if you don't do it, nobody else will. And he says, I've come to realize that I am the indispensable person only until the moment I say no. So it's all right to say no to somebody. It's all right to say to George, I'm sorry, George, I can't help you move your sofa today. And he says, but I got to get it moved today. So George is placing something that's important to him, that's not important to you, in your important part of your matrix. It's your choice to let him do that. If you say to George, it's just not something I can do today, then George will get somebody else. Don't let George impose his sense of what's important onto what your sense of what's important. God has not called you to do George's important things. God has called you to do important things that he has called you to do. So don't let other people throw their urgent stuff onto your lap and make you think that somehow you have to take care of it. So I'm going to leave you with all of that today. That is everything I wanted to cover. And I'm looking forward to your questions or comments or statements. Obviously you know what your assignments are. If you have a question on that, if you have a question, ask me the question. I will, if it's all right for me to ask that question to the whole class, let me know that. I prefer to do it that way because if you have the question, everybody else is going to have the same question. All right, so I'm going to let you go with that, and have a great week. Stay healthy and well, and we'll see you next week.